Golden Age was the big bang for the DC Comics cosmology, where its most iconic characters were created. But the Silver Age was an era of evolution and complications. The comic book industry was censored wholesale, but the outcome would be the most prolific, frenetic, and whimsical era of DC Comics.
Action Comics #1 and the debut of Superman saw the rise of superheroes, and with the bills well and paid thanks to the likes of Batman, Wonder Woman, and the JSA, DC Comics attempted to cater to broader audiences.
After World War II, the popularity of westerns, romance, and horror titles reflected the interest of an aging audience, female readers, and were a stark alternative from superheroes. Americans were tired of conflict, so like the many Americans who battled Axis forces, several DC superheroes were honorably discharged.
That is, until the Comics Code Authority entered the fray. Their impact was swift and single-handedly stigmatized comic books for decades.
Oh, you just walk up and break my back without saying a word? Oh, boo! Boo on you, sir!
That said, the 60s is when DC reached its peak popularity. Consistency was critical to the company, and come hell or high water, the fine folks at DC almost never missed a deadline. On top of that, creators stayed on assignments for years, meaning series had their own internal consistency and quality. DC started to hold themselves equally accountable for the stories that they have told and the stories that they have yet to tell. So even if canon and continuity are nearly indiscernible for much of the era, one thing is for certain: the Silver Age was a pivotal turning point for DC Comics.
So welcome back to the Comics Quest. I'm your favorite heroic hooligan, Jackson.
I'm your sensational BJ, and thank you for joining us on our continued decryption of the cosmology that is DC Comics.
By the end of the golden age of comics, superheroes had fallen by the cultural wayside. The only superhero comics that were consistently selling were, of course, Batman and Superman. In a post-war America, it would seem that superheroes had outlived their wartime purpose and fell into relative obscurity. Instead, most of the comic market was dominated by horror, humor, westerns, war tales, and teen romance genres, not superheroes.
Enter Frederick Wertham in his novel, Seduction of the Innocent.
Where Wertham asserts that children who read comics grow up to be juvenile delinquents. And DC is not exempt from his brush.
The implications of this infamous hit piece on comics required a shift in the publishing strategy for the comic book industry at large.
When the Senate Committee's attention turned to the evils of comics, Dr. Wertham was the star witness, with testimony like, "Comic books are obscene glorifications of violence and crime. Today's children have been seduced by Superman. And Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry."
So what killed the Golden Age?
The political intervention following the seduction of the innocent
Effectively catalyzed the Silver Age, sparked by creative inspiration and revolutionary scientific advancement.
After the US government threatened to place sanctions on the comic book industry, the Comics Code Authority was created. DC quickly donned the CCA seal of approval to throw off any sniff of communism, but the self-censoring organization implemented strict and far-reaching guidelines like or hard-cut rules banned publishers from using words like horror or terror in the title of their comics.
Archetypes like vampires, zombies, and werewolves were strictly prohibited because these goddamn werewolves were ruining this once great nation.
Excessive violence, nudity, profanity, slang, obscenities, and illicit sexual relationships remained unpublished.
These rules compounded upon one another and effectively kicked the knees out from under the horror, romance, and suspense genres.
Comics became somewhat homogenous, as the censorship reflected the American aspiration to construct nuclear family values.
This tenacious reporter gets to the 50s, and suddenly she's not the tenacious reporter anymore. Her real focus is Clark Kent really Superman, whom I love dearly?
But the CCA also constructed the other.
Minority groups and LGBTQ groups were at best stereotyped to the point of hyperbole, and at worst, erased completely.
Religion, sex, and mental health were subjects taken off the table.
Government officials were to be portrayed as unquestionably good.
For a plethora of reasons, few of which don't stem from the CCA, comic books became less and less realistic.
And they did this right at the time when rock and roll was starting to break. That rebellious side of youth culture was becoming more pronounced in other media, and the comic book industry gave up that edge.
Comic books would become less dynamic in many ways, with no room for niche genres or sympathetic villains, and mired down by unquestionably static characters who never veered from their heroic intentions.
The characters that began as rebellious agents against the status quo, now in the 1950s, fall into that envelope of conservative America as policemen for the status quo.
Romance comics were passionless, westerns were sterilized, and horror titles were eradicated. In their place, superheroes, celebrities, cartoons, and licensed TV characters conquered the remaining share of the market.
Just 1 year after the code's implementation, sales plunged by 75%.
If a comic book publisher did choose to break any of the CCA rules, that issue or the publisher could be barred from store shelves entirely.
But to temper this a bit, some good did come out of the CCA. Publishers could no longer advertise cigarettes, alcohol, or gambling to children. Now, attempting to distance female characters away from the sexual objects that defined many golden agers.
So, some good did come of the CCA. You just have to squint to see it. One publisher even used those rules to build their own universe.
Marvel Comics viewed the CCA with an artful mentality. Sure, the CCA was the law, but Marvel seemed to use the CCA rules as more of a guidebook on how to build a collective universe. Then to go on and build their own universe off the back of a subverted nuclear family.
DC, on the other hand, respected the CCA as law. After all, the Silver Age is when DC was defined as family-friendly, and the CCA stamp of approval lets you know that.
As such, Silver Age superheroes were forced into archetypical morality tales generally geared toward younger demographics, or just embraced how weird they could get with things.
Despite the Silver Age's somewhat unfair legacy of animosity, the era is essential for adding several new elements into the DC Comics cosmology.
Forced to adapt or face financial ruin, DC creatives drew inspiration from the atomic age of modern science.
Many classic wartime characters were reintroduced with powers and origins intrinsically intertwined with science.
The distinguishing motifs of many Golden Age comics are noir and magical themes, but the Silver Age offers a shift towards science fiction.
It is widely agreed that Showcase number 4 by Julie Swartz, Bob Knader, Carmine Infantino, and Joe Kubert marks the beginning of the Silver Age of comic books.
Forensic scientist Barry Allen's exposure to chemicals and a well-placed lightning strike make him the fastest man alive, the Flash.
Really, a superhero suit unlike anything that we've seen in comics before. It's sleek, it's one piece, red and yellow with the lightning motif.
The new sci-fi origin distanced the character from his Golden Age counterpart.
Well, the original Flash was stupid.
Still, the update also drew upon the innovation of the Atomic Age and set a precedent for countless Silver Age heroes to follow.
The word reboot has become a canary in a coal mine for many folks, but this was a welcomed and radical departure from the original Flash, who hadn't graced the comic book in something like 5 years.
The only thing I kept about the Golden Age Flash is the name and the super speed. Everything else I changed.
A few people would argue that the Martian Manhunter started the Silver Age, because he is a sci-fi based alien. However, looking at his first appearance, J'onn J'onzz is really a noir detective story that features an alien, so he just misses the mark.
Either way, the characters both grew in popularity and DC took note.
The Flash was far from the last character reintroduced. Hotshot jet fighter Hal Jordan entered the space race as the new Green Lantern, an intergalactic space cop utilizing the most powerful weapon in the galaxy.
And to show how things are going to be different, while the Golden Age Green Lantern wore his power ring on the left hand, I'm going to put it on the right hand.
His ring, powered by sheer willpower, stands in stark contrast to the magical train conductor Green Lantern of ye olde times. The Atom was another legacy character who benefited dramatically from his reintroduction. As a genius scientist, Ray Palmer was capable of compressing his size to the subatomic level.
DC also rebooted characters like Hawkman and Green Arrow, giving them their own unique portion of the cosmology to occupy and influence.
Even mainstays like Superman were innovated upon, where his alien origin was expanded, and longtime editor Mort Weisinger made Kal-El's powers limitless.
Perhaps the grumpiest editor in comic books. I said, look, you're really mean to people. And he said, imagine you're me. You get up in the morning and you look at this face. How would you feel?
We have tastefully omitted Denny O'Neil's Wonder Woman update that, 1, took away her powers during the women's liberation movement, and 2, undermined her feminist draw by tying her new motive to a man.
They said that I had taken the only powerful woman in comics and had taken her power away from her. It is now many years later, and I absolutely see what they were talking about.
The updates were wildly successful and saved comic books from falling further into social obscurity. Early in the Silver Age, no one was putting out anything like what you would find in a DC comic book.
Updating their most iconic characters eventually coalesced into the creation of the Justice League of America in 1960.
The Justice League of America was a contemporary take on the old-timers found in the Justice Society of America.
I hate the word society. It sounds like a social club. I want to use a better word, league. There's baseball leagues, football leagues.
The original version of the JLA consisted of the contemporary Green Lantern and the Flash, alongside Wonder Woman and Aquaman, who had cult appeal but faded into the background after the Golden Age. And of course, the team would be nothing without the Martian Manhunter, who for the time was still a relatively new and untested character, but is considered the heart of the team today.
Batman and Superman were members of the team because, of course, but in reality, Batman and Superman were so coveted that editors didn't want to associate them with lesser characters, at least initially.
The Justice League might be the most powerful and iconic team to ever grace the page of the comic book, but they certainly were not the only team to form during the Silver Age.
From the distant 31st century came the Legion of Superheroes in 1958. Shortly after that, a Black Ops military group was formed in The Brave and the Bold number 25. For Task Force X, completing the mission came first and foremost, and death was almost always inevitable. The Suicide Squad has slowly grown cult appeal ever since.
Then, in 1962, the hokey as hell Metalmen showed up and earned their even cultier status.
In 1964, Robin, Kid Flash, Donna Troy the Wonder Girl, and Aqualad started their own team of sidekick crime fighters, the Teen Titans. The Titans were wildly successful and have become one of the most venerated DC comic properties in more recent years.
Finally, the Doom Patrol showed up, but more on them in a minute. Outlandish tales, contemporary themes, monkeys, rich world building, and a healthy dose of pet sidekicks are the benchmarks for many classic Silver Age DC tales. DC adapted to the CCA by appealing to sci-fi themes and motifs in a cosmology where anything was possible, and audiences wanted to look up to the characters. Even with multiple smash hits on DC's hands, most of their Golden Age heroes had vanished with no explanation given in the comics, and older readers felt neglected by the contemporary themes, new characters, and all-around updates.
The confusion was cleared up and immediately complicated when DC released a cornerstone issue, Flash of Two Worlds, perhaps the first ever wide-sweeping retcon in DC Comics.
A retcon, or retroactive continuity, re-explains, recontextualizes, clarifies, or flat-out contradicts what was established in a previous story.
Mileage may vary. There have been a lot of infamous retcons in comics.
The story paved way for DC to address the absence of so many Golden Age heroes that had just been gone since World War II. In practice, the story added a whole new facet to DC Comics, the multiverse.
The text proved that there are actually two different Flashes from two different Earths, along with two different Green Lanterns, and so on and so forth. When performing a magic trick for orphans, the Flash accidentally vibrates his molecules at the proper frequency to appear on an Earth which is parallel, yet eerily similar to his own. This incident was the shaky introduction of the DC multiverse. On this parallel Earth, Jay Garrick, the original Flash, and the semi-retired Justice Society of America from the Golden Age had proved an instrumental force in beating Axis powers.
Flash of Two Worlds takes direct inspiration from string theory. For stupid people like us, string theory proposes that the smallest measurable unit of matter is a string.
These strings form bonds that connect to other strings that eventually build all positive matter, from plants to people to planets.
Keep in mind, string theory is considered natural law in DC Comics.
So then Earths are only separated from one another due to the different vibrational frequencies of the strings that make up their respective realities, and eventually constitute a multiverse.
We promise it makes sense if you don't think about it too hard, because creatives at the time certainly were not. For a general example, the JSA were at the same time fictional comic book characters that Barry Allen had read as a child, and superheroes in a different reality? In time, Barry Allen and the Justice League would be designated to Earth 1. The majority of DC's canon and continuity would occur on this more sci-fi influenced reality until about 1985.
Jay Garrick, the Justice Society, and other Golden Age heroes would populate an alternate reality of Earth 2.
The two Flashes would continue to team up and eventually reconstitute the JSA in the first ever Crisis.
Crisis on Earth 1 and Crisis on Earth 2 was a momentous occasion where the JSA and JLA met each other for the first time after being duped by the crime champions.
Of course, the two superpowered teams would be victorious and continue to traverse the multiverse for semi-yearly team-ups, our favorite of which has to be Crisis on Earth 3.
Where the JLA and JSA team up to defeat the Crime Syndicate of America from Earth 3. The Crime Syndicate are really just dickhead versions of the JLA.
In just a few short years, the cosmology of DC Comics was given form, where multiple Earths filled with constant and lurking variables could exist.
However, the crises that forced these Earths to intermingle only grew grander in scope with each subsequent iteration.
Essentially, every character goes on to meet their respective counterpart.
But Green Lantern number 40 is a crucial footnote you might miss. In this first cross-universal Green Lantern team-up, they discover the origin of the DC multiverse, an infinite number of parallel realities, and its protectors are a story 10 billion years in the making. From the earliest ages of life sprang the immortal race of Owens.
The Owens had no perception of evil, so their day was filled with art, science, and sport.
That is until a member named Krona peered into the beginning of time and glimpsed the hand of creation, the canonical origin of life in DC Comics.
Despite the Owens pleading against Krona, his window distorted the natural order of creation, and evil literally swept through the multiverse.
The Owens imprisoned Krona, and in an act of restitution, created the Green Lantern Corps. The Emerald Knights eventually capture the mad scientist and become pretty good friends along the way. But evil wasn't the only thing Krona unleashed on the multiverse.
These crossovers proved the multiverse's malleability as a setting, even in its infancy. The multiverse let DC reconcile issues voiced by readers and tie up loose ends left dangling since the Golden Age. But for those reasons, canon and continuity from the Silver Age can be pretty volatile.
In part because practically everything DC had put out from 1956 to 1970 was split across at minimum 2 different continuities that informed the same relative canon.
As far as we can tell, DC Comics does have the single longest running multiverse in all of fiction. But that comes with the caveat that creators at the time had no idea what the was going on outside of the series they were actively involved in. So even though editors and creative teams tried to respect former creative teams and fans, without established rules, the multiverse would grow dangerously out of hand.
And with the scrutiny of the CCA, it was only a matter of time until someone created their own coherent comic book universe. DC's newest super team and genre motifs have far-reaching impacts on the industry to this day.
Most obviously, without DC's proven success in the sci-fi genre, it's hard to say whether Marvel would have gone on to create many of their most iconic characters.
Marvel Comics, like DC, drew inspiration from America's atomic power and entered the superpowered arms race. Moreover, we can say that teams like the Fantastic Four or the Avengers would not be here without DC. Legend says that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were forced to create the Fantastic Four as a direct response to DC's JLA after a golfing match between the higher-ups at Marvel and DC.
My publisher, Martin Goodman, played golf with the publisher of DC Comics.
Well, I heard the story. I don't know if it's true. The president of DC Comics was Jack Leibowitz, who was very friendly with Martin Goodman, who was the head of Marvel Comics. So Martin Goodman went over to his editor named Stan Lee and said, DC has a hot item. They have a league. Next thing we knew, Fantastic Four appeared with the title, the world's greatest comic. Is that really true, folks?
That anecdote has been discredited by a few sources, but the end result saw the Silver Age kick off the Marvel-DC Cold War.
By 1968, Marvel was selling 55 million issues a year, matching or surpassing DC.
Now, back to a point from earlier. In June of 1963, DC premiered the world's strangest heroes, the Doom Patrol. Essentially, they were superheroes who were ostracized by society for their appearances, and fought the Brotherhood of Evil.
Well, 3 months later, the strangest superheroes of all appeared in X-Men #1.
Let us be clear, there are surface-level similarities between the two teams. And even the co-creator of the Doom Patrol has claimed that Stan Lee jacked his idea.
After all, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee could blast out a script in an afternoon.
And some similarities are uncanny.
But from concept to printing press to stands, all in under 3 months.
We may never know the whole truth, but competitors will do anything to beat their rivals. And it has been proposed that DC created the Flaming Homer with the Doom Patrol.
It's not without its charm.
Try lighting it on fire.
Wow!
Only for Marvel to swoop in with the Flaming Mo that was the X-Men.
Hey, this drink is delicious, and my phlegm feels looser. What do you call it? Well, it's called a flaming...
Mo! It's called the Flaming Mo. That's right, a Flaming Mo. My name is Mo, and I invented it. That's why it's called a Flaming Mo.
Unfortunately for DC, the X-Men were simply the more relatable and salient team of the times. The original run of the Doom Patrol came to their demise in 1968, while the X-Men were cancelled in 1970.
In the 60s, DC was the top dog. Marvel faced much less scrutiny from the CCA when compared to the microscope DC was under.
Even while the Vietnam War was going on, the Hulk's most persistent adversary was the U.S. Army. The Comics Code said that, you couldn't show the Army as villains. And yet at the same time, Marvel was basically making them to be the bad guys.
The Hulk looked like a menace. He looked like a monster.
In a straightforward setting, Marvel could tell edgier stories to a rapidly growing fan base with a line of flourishing new characters, whereas the stipulations DC was under forced them to rely on campier themes. The Silver Age had a whole host of campy elements that cannot be listed in their totality. So, just to give you a quick idea, here are some of the campiest elements introduced into the cosmology during the Silver Age.
This is the exact moment in time when Batman epitomized the Caped Crusader. Any given issue of a Batman comic reflected exactly what you would see in the Adam West show.
Holy, breaking and entering! It's Batgirl!
Quick, Batgirl, untie us before it's too late.
It's already too late. I've worked for you a long time, and I'm paid less than Robin. Same job, same employer means equal pay for men and women.
No time for jokes, Batgirl.
It's no joke. It's the federal equal pay law.
The Batman comic teetered on cancellation, so DC distanced the character from the whole child thing.
Batman and Robin got girlfriends, Alfred was killed off, and the superhero father-son dynamic was made crystal clear. Imperatively, Batman donned the infamously fabulous zebra and rainbow suits.
And for reasons we will explain way later, Batman dons the Zur-En-Arr outfit and the panel you have all been waiting for.
There was an unspoken rule that no more than one comic a month could have a gorilla on the cover. Then you have a small zoo of superpowered pets like Crypto the Super Dog, Ace the Bat Hound, Jumpo the Kangaroo, Topo the Octopus, Beepo the Super Ape, Storm the Seahorse, and Streaky the Super Cat.
Few of the campy elements are in and of themselves necessarily bad things. Please understand, DC's Silver Age was a time of pure imaginary stories. Imaginary stories either being a canonical non-canon story set somewhere in the multiverse, or DC's politest way of saying, if you don't like it, don't think about it all that much. The Silver Age is responsible for much of the negative stigma that comic books have today.
With the CCA's crackdown on mature themes, it seems Marvel used the sanctions to their strength, like a guidebook on building a cohesive universe and which elements and themes to omit to structure their universe.
So if you think the MCU is too clean, well, as for DC, there is a hefty amount of heady sci-fi stuff. See The Flash, The Legion of Superheroes, or Adam Strange.
Unfortunately, much of the age has been overshadowed by the more campy comics. For the layperson, when you think of a comic book, it's probably something insane like Superman versus diabetes.
And we want to say you're wrong, but maybe we should just look at one story that helped stigmatize an entire medium for decades.
Supergirl. Supergirl offers the slightest glimpse into the massive Superman mythology that uplifts the grander DC cosmology. Superman appeared in about half of all titles published by DC in the Silver Age, and introduced many pivotal players into the DC cosmology, like Brainiac, Superboy, Crypto, and of course, Supergirl.
At the time, DC was intent on giving some of its biggest characters families. The Bat, Flash, and Super families were all intended to boost sales and give the titular character a more relatable dynamic.
But also family friendly. Supergirl is not the most popular Super family member, but she is the most powerful. She quietly established herself as an independent character, relying less and less on her cousin's name alone.
But then, suddenly, Supergirl almost fucked her pet horse boyfriend.
As alluded to, throughout the Silver Age, pet sidekicks were in vogue. 40 years before purse dogs were popularized, Supergirl had a petting zoo of superpowered pets. Comet the Superhorse first appeared in Adventure Comics 293, but then, in Action Comics 292, Supergirl wakes up hot and bothered after dreaming about Comet. Horse girls. Later that day, she sees the Super Stallion in a dude ranch. She mounts him, only to discover he can fly and has a cape, because, of course, he has a cape. Then, in the next issue, titled The Secret Origins of Supergirl's Super Horse,
because even back then, someone at DC Comics must have known we would all have some questions about what the happened back there.
we discover that Comet is actually an ancient Greek centaur accidentally cursed by the Wonder Woman villain Circe. Circe gave Comet superpowers as an apology for the whole immortal horse incident, and after a few adventures with each other, Comet gains the feels for Supergirl, transforming himself into a human on multiple occasions, just so he can get in her pants. But Supergirl ain't no hussy. Comet changes back into a horse, and DC Comics begs you forget the whole thing happened as quickly as they made it a thing.
The Comics Code's conservative stipulations severely diminished the risks any creative team could take in any series. But out of that handicap came some genuinely unique and over-the-top tales where creatives had to get creative to raise the stakes of any story.
More often than not, the best way to do that was to put an unstoppable hero into an even more impossible situation.
And for whatever reason, that camp translates to more relatable or even honest versions of a lot of the characters.
How else would you react if your best friend were turned into a giant lizard person? So many of these comics are just so wholesome and optimistic that when something dramatic or realistic happens, like the death of the Doom Patrol, the comic leaves a genuinely palatable impact on the reader.
DC's innovation early in the Silver Age might have been at the sacrifice of more groundbreaking stories later on in the era. DC was the biggest publisher at the time, but that meant they faced most of the CCA's scrutiny, and they simply couldn't push the envelope as much as their direct competition.
Comparatively, Marvel sought a more liberal audience in the form of young adults during the rise of the United States counterculture movement of the 60s.
a survey conducted by Esquire magazine in 1965, which revealed that self-described college radicals ranked Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk among their favorite revolutionary icons, right there with Bob Dylan and Che Guevara and Malcolm X.
This was a simpler time for DC Comics. You won't find hyper-violence, large events, or all that many three-dimensional characters.
Superman worked closer than ever with lawful authorities. Batman and Robin spent more time with girls. And Wonder Woman hung out more with Steve. But superhero relationships stayed at the level of grade school crushes.
But you will find snowmen that shoot laser beams out of their fucking eyes.
In hindsight, the Silver Age might have been a mixed bag for DC Comics. Yes, they saved the medium by reinventing the superhero genre, but as the rules tightened down, the stories became campier and campier.
People reading and creating comics didn't always care about continuity or canon, so a wider breadth of stories could be told. After all, there were many successful anthology titles that were not held to mainline continuity.
It's hard to put to words just how stunted and homogenous so many DC characters feel from the era.
DC Comics were still sort of stuck in the 50s. Nobody really had personalities or opinions or, everybody kind of liked each other. They were all hail fellows, well met. Justice League was kind of the Kiwanis Club, and Wonder Woman was their secretary.
No one was able to publish genuine horror stories. And with mature or realistic depictions of the world being written out, superheroes were considered good or reliable.
But it can't be understated how significant DC's management of their properties was. Without their success in the Silver Age, we wouldn't have superheroes or comics like we do today.
And Stan Lee, the name of that guy, puts out a magazine called The Fantastic Four. It proved to be a big hit. So in a sense, I not only saved DC Comics, I saved Marvel Comics too.
With that, DC's Silver Age is mostly either hyper-creative, heady sci-fi, or campy, nonsensical fun.
Unfortunately, the campy stuff seems to have cemented the stigma that comic books are for kids. A stigma that has undermined the brilliant work of creators for close to 70 years. And yet, without that campy undercurrent, it's hard for DC characters to exude that sense of kindness and camaraderie that you expect from the genre. For the time, that camp did result in a line of somewhat homogenous characters who never veered from their heroic intentions. But in an era of nuclear proliferation, open racism, public assassinations, a Cold War, and some hot ones too, it was obvious superheroes couldn't save the day anymore.
In a world that was becoming less and less rational, it was all the more rational for Superman to drop off Aquaman and Jimmy Olsen in the desert to prove who the real Aquaman is.
DC offered some sense of morality, guidance, and stability. Even if you had to wait a month, pay a whopping 10 cents, and read all 36 pages in a few minutes, stability is priceless. We think camp gets a bad rap these days, when in truth, camp is a lot like oysters, blue cheese, or pineapple on pizza. It's just an acquired taste.
You wouldn't get a lady, would you?
The hammer of justice is unisex.
For some genuine Silver Age recommendations, you can't go wrong with Wonder Woman 136 to see the curious case of the 100-story Wonder Woman.
We love all of the Justice League, especially in the early years.
If you want sci-fi, look for the Strange Adventures anthology title. We recommend checking out issue 180 until about 240. If nothing else, you get to see Carmine Infantino's stunningly visualized vistas and the creation of Animal Man.
The Elongated Man's backup stuff is fantastic.
If you want camp, Mort Weisinger's run as editor on Superman is the definitive and most powerful version of that version of the character.
He created this strange world of cats and dogs and horses that were actually humans that had been transformed. He made it kind of like a big playground.
The Inferior Five are a poor man's version of the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia crew, but with superpowers. And if you dare to see DC's earliest failed attempt to capitalize on Marvel's counterculture themes, check out Brother Power the Geek. Keep in mind, you can learn just as much from a bad comic as you can a good comic.
The Silver Age also saw DC acquire the remains of EC Comics, giving us Alfred E. Newman and the equally iconic Mad Magazine. So check that out for some pointed, if not dated, humor.
Bill, was it a success from day one, Mad Magazine?
No. I think it became successful with issue 4
when we lampooned Superman. We ran a feature called Super Duper Man. And
that's hilarious.
It was then.
And of course, Batman 66 certainly has its moments.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
But as the Silver Age waned, so did DC's popularity.
The aforementioned homogeneous feel so many DC titles shared meant that for a lot of younger readers, DC Comics was short for Dad Comics. Or Dad Comics Comics. Boo! The Cultural Revolution of the 70s saw the American public more informed than ever, and social institutions were open to criticism.
As the 60s draws to a close, both the quaintness of DC's heroes and the high camp of Batman begin to feel out of touch in the midst of race riots and draft card burnings.
The struggles of the time galvanized DC Comics and the industry at large to grow up. Our decryption of the DC Comics cosmology continues next time as it undergoes its most dramatic challenges yet in the Bronze Age of comics. Thank you guys for giving us a shot here at the Comics Quest. It means the world to us. If you like us, tell your friends. If you don't like us, tell your enemies. It's a win-win for everybody. And we hope to see you soon. Bye, folks.
We can't say we give out a free comic to our favorite comment without following up. So to you, good sir, expect us to reach out soon. We loved your sense of nostalgia and appreciate you for illustrating what the Comics Quest means to us. Please keep sharing your comic book memories, experiences, and love for the medium. And remember to comment below if you want a chance to win this lovely, campy, fun sci-fi comic book.